Hey guys, it's Patrick Hall with fstoppers.com, and recently ACDSee reached out to me and asked, could you do a complex photo shoot and then edit the final image in their Gemstone software? Well, that's exactly what we're gonna do. Now, as you might suspect, this video is sponsored by ACDSee's Gemstone. Gemstone gives you all of the best features of both Lightroom and Photoshop in one convenient piece of software that you get to buy outright and don't have to subscribe month by month. Some of the features that are available in this brand new piece of software are their raw editor, adjustment layers and layer masks, some incredible lighting and color tools, multi-document interface so you can add multiple images into one single photograph. And if you're like me and you hate spending a lot of time creating really complex selections, Gemstone offers both custom and AI selection-based tools, which allows you to spend more time editing and less time making masks. At the end of this photo shoot, I'm gonna be editing the final image in ACDSee's Gemstone, but if you wanna get your own copy, head to the link in the description below and check it out. All right guys, we are back in the studio today, and this is really exciting because I'm doing something kind of out of the ordinary for what I normally do. We got Gabby here, who's an amazing athlete. She does gymnastics and pole vaulting. You should see this girl bench and lift. I mean, it's crazy. She's a fighter today. She brought this outfit, and we're gonna get some really dramatic images. The idea that I have for today, and I've been taking some images already, but the idea is to create something that's really graphic, that stands out. It's not just a tough girl, or it's not just a pretty photo. It kind of blends the two together. As we started playing around with this, we kind of went from a monotone black and white sort of feel to now we have all these crazy lights. So let me explain what we got going on. If you look over here, we have two ProPhoto lights. One of them is a strip box that's just lighting our backdrop. And then I have a second ProPhoto B10 back here. I don't have any modifier on it back there. Really, these could be exactly the same, but it's just the way that it wound up. So I've also put some red gels on here. You can see we have the modeling lamps on, so everything is going red. Now, in an ideal world, you'd have two V-flats on both sides, and that would help control most of the light from the background spilling on our subject. I just have one. Right on this side, I do have one of these dark backdrops, which is kind of acting as the same thing. But let me go ahead and take a test shot and show you guys what this looks like. So now that we have Gabriella looking really nice, she's backlit with the red light, and then she's in complete shadow, I want to add an interesting light. Now there is a lot of things I could use here in the studio. We have some grids that could be kind of cool and just put like a really small gridded light, like a highlight on her face. We could use a strip box and have something kind of edging her out. But I thought we have this really interesting light up here. This is the Optical Spot by Westcott, and I have it mounted to another ProPhoto B10. And as I turn this on and off, you can see there's just this little slit of light coming through the light modifier. And if I take a shot now, you can see what that does. I mean, that's really cool. It's like natural warm light that looks like daylight coming through her body, but then the rest of her body is totally black, and then the background is red. So it's got like all of this, you know, contrast going on. The other thing in looking at these images that I'm taking is that because so much of her body is in shadow, I don't want her standing like this because she's just gonna look like a pencil, or you're gonna see her clothing and it's gonna look like a fold in her skin. It's just gonna look weird. And so I'm trying to pose her and give her some really big poses that she can do. She's got these cool hand wraps on, and so I'm also making sure that if those are in the frame, they need to be in that sliver of light and not out in the shade, because it's gonna make her hands look kind of strange. So we're just gonna work through a handful of poses. She's totally ripped and jacked here, so I'm making sure she's crunching her abs when she takes pictures. We're also paying attention to the ponytail, because sometimes that looks kind of strange if it's just a shadow. So I might position her face in a certain way to get that nice edge. So let's go ahead and take a bunch of pictures. Now, as we were shooting, something interesting gonna happen. We have the overhead lights turned to blue just so that they're not really interfering with the video. It allows us to still see what we're doing and talk to each other, but it's not really affecting the exposure. But in person, I can see this cool blue outline around her. And I thought, you know, instead of setting up even more strobes and putting blue gels on them, what if I just dragged my shutter a little longer and try to introduce some of that natural blue light? In theory, it shouldn't really affect my background because the red light is so strong. but anything that's black in the frame, her whole body, her hair, the top part of her, I think it could start to burn in a little bit. So I'm gonna go from like 1/200th of a second and just take some shots maybe at 1/10 of a second. And then I'm also gonna slow my shutter really slow. Let's go to like 1/2 a second. That's really, really long. But it's giving me some interesting effects. It's starting to blend all the lights together. And then just out of curiosity, if I like move the camera while I take the picture, what's happening is the flash is still so strong that it's creating a nice sharp image, but now I'm getting all of this crazy blurred effect. It's almost like a double exposure. The longer I drag my shutter, the more of an impact that's gonna be. So at 1/5 of a second, that might be a little too much, but at 1/10 of a second, I don't know, it's kind of interesting. It just brings the whole image together instead of it just being a black person with a little highlight through them on a red background. It's starting to add a little motion, the colors are blurring, it's giving a little bit of gradient on my backdrop. I think this looks really cool. Of course, there are some issues with this image. You could go for this deconstructed look where you see all the stuff in the background and the clips and the chains for the backdrop. I think it looks kind of cool. But maybe in post-production, we want to remove some of that. We might also want to give another color grade on top of this. So let's pick out our best images, take a few of these into Gemstone, see if we can tweak them a little bit, give them a color grade, remove a few things in the background, and come up with a final image. All right, so here we are in front of a computer. I have ACDSee's Gemstone open. I'm gonna go ahead and hit File, Open, and then I'm gonna hit Control A to select all of my files and open all of them. This is actually gonna open up their RAW editor, which is going to allow me to see all the photos, and then we can go through and pick our favorite selects. This part of the software is called ACDSee RAW, and if you've used any kind of RAW editor, you are probably pretty familiar with this sort of layout. And as you can see, these are some of my favorite images throughout the shoot. And as you can see here in my film strip, I basically have two different types of images. I have these images here that are much darker where we didn't drag the shutter, and so we don't have any of the blue overhead lights coming in. And then we have these images here in the middle where we've dragged the shutter, we've kind of changed the overall color. And then some of these images I actually move the camera while exposing, and you have these kind of whimsical, dreamy looking exposures. So the first thing that I want to do is I want to give a basic look to both sets of these images so that I can go through them quickly and see them. On my monitor here, they actually look a little dark. So I'm just going to select one of them. And then over here on the right, I'm going to play around with our highlights and fill light and try to create a basic exposure that I'm happy with. Let's go ahead and bump our exposure up significantly. I'm going to leave the highlights alone. Let's go ahead and introduce a little bit of fill light. As you can see, because we shot with such hard shadows, pulling the fill light up isn't really exposing any detail in the dark shadows, but it is giving the skin and the red in the background a little bit of boost. Something like that looks pretty good. And with sports images like this, I like to bump up the clarity a little bit. So I'm gonna go up, I don't know, like maybe 25. If I go too far, you can see it just starts to make all of her skin really grungy. I definitely don't want that look. So maybe somewhere around 24 looks pretty good to me. Let's go down to white balance really quickly and let's play around with the color. Sometimes when you're shooting with all of these different types of lights, you have colored light in the background and then you have a key light that's set to a certain white balance. Sometimes your colors can go really strange. I want to keep this really warm so it looks like the sunlight from outside is hitting her. If I go too blue, it's pretty cool. It almost looks like she's working out, under a moonlight or something like that, but I want to keep this image pretty warm, so we'll go here. And then maybe I'm going to pull the tint up towards magenta just a bit. I feel like there's a little bit of green tone in her skin for whatever reason. Sliding the magenta to the right definitely takes care of that. Under light EQ, we can now really fine-tune the shadows, midtones, and highlights. I'm going to bump up the midtones just a bit. I'm also going to bump the highlights up just a tad. And then I'm going to not crush the blacks, but just pull down the shadows just a touch. Now under color EQ, this is an area where you can really dial in the skin tone. If somebody is like me and you kind of have some rosacea in the face, or they're a darker skin model, or your light was set a little too warm, if there's any kind of strangeness going on with the color of skin, I really like to use color EQ because here I can go down to orange, which is typically where skin tone is going to fall. And this is affecting my red background just a bit because we do have that really strong red hue back there. Now sometimes with skin tones, I like to desaturate the skin just a touch. Maybe I pull that down to like -4. We can come up to brightness. And if I pull the orange down in brightness, it's going to give a little grungy effect. I like to bump that up just a little bit. And under hue, this is where you can really fine tune skin tones. Sometimes it goes a little too red, or sometimes it's a little too yellow. I'm just gonna come in here and slide this around a bit. I think pushing it just slightly towards the orange side looks really good. Now they also have this contrast section. I've never seen this in other software. Let's go ahead and see what happens if I pull up the contrast just a bit on the orange. That actually looks nice. It kind of gives a little more pop in her skin tones. Now let's come down to tone wheels real quick. And here is an area where if you want to give an overall color grade to your images, you can quickly do that. Here we have the highlights, and then we have a color wheel. So if I want to make my highlights a little bit warmer, I could pull that down kind of over here towards the orange-red side. And then I usually like to skip midtones and come down to shadows. And one common way to edit is to bring your shadows into a cooler tone. If we do that, you can see what it's doing. It's immediately giving it kind of this film grade, which looks pretty nice. I'm gonna go really subtle with it. And then I like to go back to my midtones since I've done the two extremes, and then fine tweak kind of the middle tones to see if there's an overall direction I wanna go. With this image, I might actually push the midtones towards the warmth side as well. If you want to see the work that you've done, you can come up here and deactivate the group, and you can see where we were before and after. I think that adds a little bit of punch and warmth to her skin, so I'm going to keep that on. And since I'm not editing all these pictures, I just want to give this a quick overall edit. You could also come down here and do all of these other things. They have all these effects where you could do photo effects, color overlays, gradient maps. You have color LUTs, you have split toning, you have the vignette if you wanted to add that. I'm not going to do that to any of these. I'm just going to go ahead and apply what I've done to this one image. I want to apply this to all of the photos that were done in this same little section. So I'm going to come over here to copy settings. Let's go ahead and select all. I haven't done any crazy cropping or geometry changes, so all that should be fine. I hit OK. I'm going to go to the end of my film strip, and then I'm going to find the very first image, hit Shift and click. I now have all of the images in that same sequence selected, and now I can right click and I can hit paste settings. Now this is going to paste those same settings on all 17 images. And as you can see, each image is getting this setting applied to. They're brightening up in the thumbnail. And now when I click on each image, they look a little bit more polished, a little bit more refined, and I find that it's a lot easier to now go ahead and make my selections once I can see the final image in a very close edit that I might do here later on. Now, as I showed in the video, I did have a few of these images with the long exposures. I think these look really cool, and potentially there is something that I could use these for, but I believe my favorite image out of all of them is actually going to be this photo right here. I just love how the light cuts through her body. I love the flexing pose that she gave. She kind of did that on her own. I thought that was really cool. And then I like the, it shows the ponytail. It's a very feminine image, but it's also got a lot of power and strength and color. And in my mind, this is kind of everything coming together the way that I thought at the beginning of the photo shoot. Now I could quickly do an edit on this image and apply it to all of the photos that have this same kind of lighting scheme with the long shutter speed, but because I know this is my favorite image, let me go ahead and just do a quick edit and then we'll throw it into Gemstone. So I'm gonna come over to General and just basically do the same sort of thing. I'm just gonna go ahead and bump up the exposure. I don't think my exposure was that off in camera, but maybe this monitor is a little bit darker. Pull our fill light up just a little. And you can see as I change fill, how much it changes the overall color. I think I like that effect because it's giving kind of more of a feminine feel to an overall edgy, grungy type of lighting setup that we have here. I also really like the gradient here. I know I said the overall lights didn't really make that big of a difference on set, but now that I look at these images, there's definitely this gradient of purples down the bottom that then go up to the red. I think that's really cool, and I want to accentuate that in this edit. Now with contrast, if I start pulling this down to the left, you can see not only is it making the image a little more muddy, but you're starting to see some of the detail in the dark sections of her body. I want to avoid that. I don't really want to show off, her shorts and her legs and anything that was in shadow. I instead want to kind of pull those into black. So I'm gonna bump that up just a touch. We'll go to like 5. And then just like the last image, I'll bump up a little bit of clarity. And then under light EQ, I'm gonna do pretty much the same sort of technique that I did before. Bump up the midtones, drop the shadows a little bit, and then finally play with the highlights just a bit. The highlights are really affecting that hot spot on the background, so I wanna pull those down and just make it a really solid color back there. And under the orange slider here, under color EQ, I'm gonna just bump up the brightness just a touch. and bring the hue down to the orange side just a little bit more. So that looks pretty good. So you could easily edit, you know, a whole session like this and get all the colors looking good. Let's go ahead and throw this into Gemstone and do our final edit. So I'm simply going to just come down here to the bottom and hit open. And that is now going to process that raw file and throw it into Gemstone. All right, so here we go. We have our image in Gemstone. And if you've ever used a program like Photoshop, this actually is laid out in a very similar fashion, but it's gonna be a whole lot easier to use. They've really removed some of the more confusing elements of Photoshop and just really focused on the things that photographers and graphic designers use the most. Over here we have our layers panel. If we wanted to add a layer, we could hit the plus here and add another layer. And then of course you could, you know, edit on top of that. I'm gonna go ahead and delete that since I do not need that layer. But one thing I do wanna do is I wanna add an adjustment layer. So I can come over here, click on adjustment layer. And one thing that I wanna tweak a little bit more is the skin tone. So I'm gonna go up to skin tune, see what this does. So it's recognizing all of her skin tones and everything that was lit by that optical spot light modifier that we had. And if I go to the right with smoothing, it looks like it's cleaning up the skin. And then the radius seems to be adjusting how much of that smoothing effect is applied overall. A smaller radius seems to be doing a more localized skin retouch, while a larger radius is doing something a little bit bigger. Something like that looks pretty good. Go ahead and close out of that. As I look at this image, I feel like I'm losing some contrast on her stomach. She had these really chiseled abs, and you can see some of that definition here. So let's come down here to adjustment layer, and maybe I could do that with, let's try doing it with a curves layer. I just want to go ahead and pull down some of the shadows, and I know this is affecting my overall image. But I'm just going to make a really basic S-curve here. And that is bringing down some of the shadows and then also bumping some of the highlights. So now that this is applying to the entire image, I want to remove it from the entire image and only have it show up on her abs. So I'm going to go over here to the layer mask, right click, and hit invert mask. Now everything is hidden. I'm going to come over to my brush tool, add a little bit of feathering. And now that I have a soft brush picked out, I'm going to invert my black to white, and then I'm just going to paint just a little bit here on her abs, maybe even on the sports bra, just to give it a little bit more contrast, maybe even just a little bit on the shoulder there. That looks pretty good. If I find that that's just a little too strong, I can also come down to the opacity and change that and blend it in just a little bit better. Something like that looks pretty good. Now, one thing that kind of bothers me about this image is right behind her, some of the hard, clear white light that we were using from our light modifier is going past her and hitting our backdrop. So I want to essentially paint this and make it the same color as our backdrop. So the way to do that would be to, let's go up to select and go to subject selection. Let's see how well this works. This is going to use AI and different types of mapping to figure out what's in focus and out of focus and what your subject is. And look at that, it created a mask really quickly. I'm going to go ahead and invert this mask. I can hit Control-Shift-I or just come up here to select and hit inverse. Now that we have our selection inverted, I'm going to come over here to our eyedropper. I'm going to just basically pick that pink color that's right behind her. And now that I've selected the pink color right next to her sports bra there, let me just go ahead and paint some of that in with a soft brush. Something like that looks pretty good. And then the final thing I think I want to do with this image is I just want to put a little bit of color in the shadows and give it a feel to where it doesn't look straight out of camera, or it kind of allows some of that blue light to spill into the shadows. So in order to do that, let's come down to our adjustment layers and let's go to gradient map. Now for my shadows, I want to pick kind of a blue like we had for the photo shoot. Maybe go to one of these like kind of purple colors. For our highlights, let's go over here to kind of a hot pink color. And what that's done is it's made all of our blacks, the darkest parts of the image, go really blue, and then all of the highlights, those parts of the image have gone pink. That obviously is way too heavy-handed. So I'm going to come over here to our gradient map and now just drag this down. And I want to drag it really far down. I want to take it to like 5%, maybe 7%. And if I toggle this on and off, you can see what it's doing. It's just putting a little bit of wash into our shadows And it's making the skin tones, which almost have this warm, kind of almost green tint, and it's just making them a little purple as well. I think that looks really good. If I feel like it's a little much on the skin, I can click on the mask itself, come over here to a brush. Let me go ahead and reset everything to black and white. I'm gonna paint out that effect just on her skin. Now if I turn it on and off, you can see it's really just affecting everything other than the background image. And now I think the final thing that we can do is kind of straighten the image and give it a crop. I don't like how her legs bend down here at the bottom, plus you can see all of the junk that was on the studio floor. So I'm gonna come up here to the crop tool. I'm gonna go ahead and select 2:3, which I think is the same ratio that we shot it at. Let's go ahead and shrink it just a bit. And you can see no matter how I pull this, it's always gonna keep it in that same ratio. And come down here and rotate it. I wanna straighten up my backdrop just a little bit. I actually do like the ripped paper up here at the top. I think that looks pretty nice. I'm gonna crop in just a little bit tighter. Something like that looks pretty good. Hit OK. All right, so there is the final image. I think this is a really fun photo shoot. If you don't go out and challenge yourself to create an image that looks unlike anything you've ever done before, I think you're really missing out on one of the joys of photography, and that's putting someone in front of your camera, working together to create a really cool image and kind of stepping outside of your comfort zone. For me, this definitely was that on the shooting side, but then also editing in Gemstone as well. I found it really easy to edit in this since it's kind of similar to Lightroom and Photoshop. If you guys want to get your own copy of Gemstone, head to the link in the description below. You can download a free trial. I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised at how easy this software is to use. If you guys enjoy videos like this, make sure you subscribe to our channel below. This year, we're trying to hit 1 million subscribers, and we're so very, very close. Help us out with that. Go ahead and hit that notification bell as well. If you guys want to learn how to do really high-end photography from some of the world's best photographers, head over to fstoppers.com/store, where you can check out all different types of photo genres, including landscapes, product photography, fashion photography, swimwear. I mean, there's literally something for everybody. Definitely check that out. And if video is not really your thing and you enjoy reading articles, definitely head over to fstoppers.com, where you can check out our blog. In the meantime, I'm gonna get out of here. I got a lot of work still to do in the studio. I will see you guys very soon.